Chabashira-sensei enters into the classroom, holding the results of the final exam. She reveals that everyone successfully passed and congratulates the class before announcing that next week will be the last special exam of the year. Now it's in between classes when Ayano Koji is caught up in a conversation between Nagamo and Manabu. Nagamo asks if Ayano Koji knows anything about the rumors that were spreading around, but of course he says no. They then discuss the upcoming special exams just before Nagamo calls out to Horikita. Manabu asks what he thinks he's doing, and Nagamo responds with,
"Just wanted to meet your cute little sister."
Manabu then declares that attempting to use her as a threat will be less than effective, though Nagamo simply wanted to invite her to join the student council. However, she declines. He then states they obviously have a very close relationship, and then proceeds to warn Manabu to be very careful in the upcoming special exams. Ayano Koji then heads back to class, striking up a conversation with Horikita. He asks if she wants to repair her relationship with Manabu, but she says no, Manabu's only ever interested in you. The following day, Chabashira walks into class, emanating dread, seriousness, and concern. She mentions that this school year will end with the special exam next week. However, not a single first year has been expelled. Due to this, the school is implementing a very simple bonus exam, which begins today and finishes on Saturday. Each student will be required to cast 3 praise votes and 3 criticism votes on their classmates. Praise and criticism cancel each other out, and the person with the most praise votes will receive 1 protection point, which holds the power to overturn your own expulsion. However, the person who accumulates the most criticism votes will be immediately expelled, though fortunately this expulsion will not harm the class. Chabashira straight up admits the teachers are very unhappy with this bonus exam, and tells them the only way to stop the expulsion is by spending 20 million private points. Horikita then says they can simply rig the voting to end in a tie, but Chabashira shuts this down, explaining that a tie will simply result in another vote. Then on top of all this, each person is required to cast an additional praise vote toward a student from another class. Now the thought of accumulating 20 million private points is borderline impossible for Class C, causing them to erupt into chaos. Koenji tells everyone to just settle down, causing Pseudo to state that Koenji is a prime target for expulsion. Koenji immediately brings up his overwhelming talent, which Pseudo points out that it doesn't matter if you don't use it. After class, the Ayano Koji group meets up at the cafe to discuss this bonus exam. Yukimura has been racking his brain for a loophole, but isn't having any luck. So the group decides their best course of action is to vote as a single unit, which Ayano Koji definitely agrees with. They then notice Ryun off to the side, reading a book, almost as if he has nothing to worry about. They find this odd, since he's currently the most hated person in Class D, so Hasabe can't help but to wonder what Ryun is thinking. Horikita suddenly arrives saying, "Well, let's go ask him," and Ayano Koji follows behind her. She immediately asks what Ryun's planning to do, but he states,
"Nothing."
She mentions that he's totally fucked in this exam, to which he says yep, explaining that Class D will be completely screwed without him. She wonders if Ryun could in fact save himself, to which he says,
"Of course I could."
He then proceeds to ask if Horikita has what it takes to expel a classmate. She doesn't give a very convincing answer, and walks away shortly after. She then asks if Ayano Koji knows how Ryun could save himself. However, he doesn't have any idea. Ayano Koji is on his way to school the next day when Ichinose calls out to him. He turns to greet her, she seems to freeze for a moment before they begin discussing this brutal bonus exam. Asahina then arrives, asking to speak with Ayano Koji, and immediately mentions that Ichinose may have a crush on him. Next, she explains that Ichinose went to Nagamo for help with acquiring 20 million private points in order to save her classmate. Nagamo actually agreed, however in return, Ichinose must agree to become his girlfriend. Ayano Koji wonders why she went out of her way to tell him this, and she states that her class needs those points, and that she also just kinda feels bad for Ichinose. Later that day, he decides to have lunch in the library where Hiyori sits down next to him to read. A short while later, they begin discussing Ryun, prompting Hiyori to explain that Class D collectively decided to expel Ryun for this test. Personally, she's against this idea, and Ayano Koji even agrees with her, stating that Ryun is a valuable asset. After class is over, he asks Horikita if she's come up with a plan for this test. She doesn't give him an answer and just begins walking away. Harada then asks him to hang out later, just before Ayano Koji leaves the classroom, bumping into Sakaya Nagi. Apparently, her father, aka the school chairman, was recently suspended from his position, which may or may not have something to do with this ridiculous bonus exam. She also claims this exam was implemented with the intention of expelling a certain specific student. Kamuro is then dismissed as Sakaya Nagi brings up the idea of postponing their previously agreed upon competition. Ayano Koji says that's fine, and Sakaya Nagi promises not to hinder him during this exam. He's very grateful and tells her to be careful. However, there's no need for that because her class has already agreed to expel Katsuragi. Next, he meets up with Harada, who we learn has been worrying himself sick over having to expel a classmate. He's even tried going around asking seniors for spare points, but didn't have any luck. They then run into Koenji, who brings up their
useless
classmates, causing Harada to nearly snap, telling Koenji that type of behavior may come back to bite him. They then enter into Harada's room, where he says the class would probably be better off with Ayano Koji as their leader. Now it's roughly midnight when Ichinose enters into Ayano Koji's dorm. He asks if she went to Nagamo for help, and she immediately realizes Asahina already explained the situation. He then asks just how many points she needs, which turns out to be just over 4 million. She wants to know Ayano Koji's opinion on whether or not she should accept this deal. However, he doesn't give her a straight answer, and instead states this option is only available because of who she is. This response really impresses Ichinose, causing her heart to skip a beat. The following morning, Ayano Koji arrives to class, feeling as though something is off. Horikita and Yukimura notice the same thing, leading him to assume that a large group is beginning to form. That evening, Ayano Koji goes to meet up with Manabu and Tachibana. After a bit of a discussion, Ayano Koji brings up Horikita, stating that she could really use some advice right about now. Manabu, however, has no intention of helping her, unless she comes to him for help, and they move on to discussing Nagamo. Manabu insists that they have to crush Nagamo now, because next year will be hell if he's still the president. Ayano Koji agrees to do what he can, before heading back to his dorm to receive an urgent call from Kei. She says a large group has formed to work together on this bonus exam, and Ayano Koji just so happens to be their target for expulsion. He ends the conversation and dials Manabu, informing him of the situation and his plan to overcome it. Manabu agrees to help, and Ayano Koji then gets in touch with Kushida. She's actually been expecting this phone call, so he wastes no time asking who's the mastermind behind this group. It does take a bit of back and forth, but eventually she reveals Yamauchi to be the leader. Ayano Koji thanks her, stating that he assumes Sakaya Nagi to be the puppet master, since she's been in contact with him recently. The very next morning, Ayano Koji arrives to class to find everyone staring at him. Horikita asks what the hell he did, however, she's not referring to their classmates. You see, the night before, Horikita received an unexpected message from her older brother, and after a short exchange, they agree to meet up in person. She says it's been 3 years since they spoke like this, and exclaims that she came here today seeking courage and help with leading her class. Manabu acknowledges that she's grown since coming to this school, and he then encourages her to quit chasing after others and to focus on herself. He then ends their meeting by giving her a certain helpful piece of information. It's now the day just before the vote when Horikita walks to the front of the room addressing the class. She wishes to discuss the bonus exam because she's picked someone in particular that they need to expel. Harada attempts to cut her off, but Sudo and Koenji don't let him. Horikita declares that Yamauchi deserves to be expelled since he's the weakest link of the class. Yamauchi throws out excuses as she goes on to explain that he used Kushida to win everyone to his side. The class is in total shock as Horikita reveals that Yamauchi has even been colluding with Class A in order to have Ayanokoji expelled. Then with beautiful timing, Koenji speaks up in favor of Horikita's plan, but on the other side, Harada strongly disagrees. He refuses to go along with her plan and openly asks for volunteers, but of course nobody steps forward. Horikita offers up the idea of doing a practice vote right now, causing a desk to go flying across the room. Harada yells for her to just shut up and proclaims that he will be voting to have Horikita expelled. Then it's sometime after class that Ayanokoji sees Harada and goes to speak with him. Harada just can't come to terms with purposely expelling a classmate, and he even wishes Ayanokoji would just take over as the class leader. Of course he declines, but he does tell Harada to just use his 3 criticism votes on himself, Yamauchi, and Horikita, which in turn leaves the decision to the rest of the class. Jumping back in time a bit, we watch Class D collectively agree to expel Ryun. Ibuki is then confronted by Manabe, who states that Ibuki will be the next to go once Ryun is gone. Ishizaki then pulls Ibuki outside, as neither of them want Ryun to get expelled. However, Ibuki does agree to go collect the millions of points that Ryun has accumulated. She enters into his dorm, wasting no time, bluntly asking for his points. He gladly hands them over before pinning Ibuki to the wall, saying he's never disliked her brusque attitude. She's then released and steps outside, immediately making a phone call. Around this same time, Ichinose informs her class that nobody is going to be expelled. A few of them have their doubts, but they still entrust her with all their points. Kanzaki brings up that they are still 4 million points short, prompting Ichinose to explain that Nagamo is going to lend them the rest. It's now the night before the bonus exam, and she has until midnight to make her decision. She leans back against the wall, contemplating whether or not it's worth dating Nagamo in order to save a classmate. Now, upon hearing of this bonus exam, Sakayanagi immediately ordered her class to vote for Katsuragi. Yuhiko was the only person to object. However, Katsuragi tells him to be quiet and to just follow her orders. Sakayanagi then goes to meet with her spy, who is obviously in love with her. She uses Yamauchi's feelings to manipulate him into following her orders, all the while promising to give him 20 praise votes from Class A. He's more than thrilled by this and asks for a written contract, but she takes offense to this and refuses. A few days later, we see Class A discussing how Horikita managed to ruin their plan. Hashimoto told Sakayanagi that Karuizawa is probably Ayanokoji's partner. However, she still chose to bring her into Yamauchi's group. Sakayanagi then explains that she did this in order to confirm that Karuizawa is in fact working with Ayanokoji. It's finally Saturday, the day of the vote, and everyone arrives to class 30 minutes early. Harada takes the stage, asking for the class to direct all their criticism votes toward him, even going as far to say that he's always hated this class. Chabashiro then enters into the room and the voting commences. Now, Class A quickly cast their votes and are patiently awaiting the results. Mashima-sensei announces the person that received the most criticism votes was in fact Yahiko Tatsuka. Katsuragi demands an explanation for this, so Sakayanagi explains that she turned Yahiko into an example of what happens to traitors. So Yamauchi is physically shaking in his seat, as Harada tries to comfort him, stating that he will be the one to get expelled. Koenji then shows Harada a text message that he received yesterday, which explains quite the opposite. Koenji then provokes Yamauchi into exclaiming that he will in fact be receiving 20 praise votes from Class A. Koenji responds with,
I assume you have that in writing.
just as Chabashira begins reading the results. With a big smile, Chabashira reveals that Ayanokoji took first place with a total of 42 praise votes, which to explain is more votes than students in this class. Horikita is completely shocked and asks what he did, but of course he says nothing. Chabashira then reads the name of the student who will be expelled from this class, Yamauchi Haruki. He immediately states that Sakayanagi broke her promise, however, he's unable to prove his claims. Koenji then begins taunting Yamauchi, who picks up a chair, swinging it down toward him. Koenji graciously stops the chair, asking if Yamauchi is prepared for the consequences of his actions. Though before anything can happen, Chabashira steps in, escorting Yamauchi out of the room. Ayanokoji then takes a moment to speak with Koenji, somewhat thanking him for purposely absorbing all of Yamauchi's wrath, before he then heads to the announcement board. Ryun says he must have been saved by the Grim Reaper, and asks about Sakayanagi. This causes a very dark expression to form on Katsuragi's face, before he walks away. Ryun then asks to verify what exactly transpired this week. Ayanokoji explains how Ishizaki and Ibuki came asking for help, so he told them to first acquire Ryun's points. Then the night before the exam, they showed up with said points, so Ayanokoji invited Ichinose to join them. She was in need of 4 million private points in order to save her classmate, and she offered up all of Class B's praise votes as compensation. Ibuki agreed, and Ayanokoji acted as the judge, verifying this transaction. He then goes on to explain that he went through all of this trouble just so that Ichinose would owe him a favor, and just after saying this, his phone begins to ring. Ichinose has called to discuss the outcome of this bonus exam, and to thoroughly thank him for all the help. Ayanokoji then goes to meet up with Sakayanagi, who explains that she had Class A give him praise votes as a way to counter Yamauchi's plan. This means that in the end, she did not hinder him during this bonus exam. She then mentions that Yahiko acquired 1 less criticism vote than expected, prompting Ayanokoji to explain that he guessed her bluff, and thus gave his praise vote to Yahiko. She then reveals that she was instructed to get Ayanokoji expelled, just as an unknown man interrupts their conversation. She believes this to be a rather unlikely coincidence, and the man introduces himself to be the school's new acting director. Tsukishiro suddenly kicks Sakayanagi's cane. Ayanokoji swiftly catches her, just before receiving a strong blow to his side. Mr. Director then slams Ayanokoji against the wall, choking him, declaring that Ayanokoji's father demands for him to drop out. He goes on saying that Sakayanagi did not follow her orders, before finally walking away. She then states that Ayanokoji made the correct decision not to fight back, because the director could have used that to have him expelled. Ayanokoji then exclaims that they will settle their competition during this upcoming special exam, so that afterwards he can focus on the bigger enemies. Now, if you guys want to know every single detail of this series, then be sure to buy the books for yourself, which can be done through my affiliate links down below, which help to support this channel.